Henry VIII I am. Henry VIII I am.
When Henry VIII became King of England in 1509, he was a devout Catholic. In 1521, Henry wrote a stinging attack on Luther's ideas. In recognition of Henry's support, the Pope gave him the title Defender of the Faith. Political needs, however, soon tested his religious loyalty. He needed a male heir. Henry's father had become king after a long civil war. Henry feared that a similar war would start if he died without a son as his heir.
Henry VIII had everything he could want, except a son to follow in his footsteps.
Thanks, Marge. Henry VIII and his wife, Catherine of Aragon, had one living child. No, not the monkey, a daughter, Mary. Up until then, no woman had ever successfully claimed the English throne. Oh, by the way, Henry's brother was originally married to Catherine of Aragon to set up an alliance with Spain, but he died soon after the wedding, so Henry eventually married her to maintain the alliance. Anyway, by 1527, Henry was convinced that the 42-year-old Catherine, who Henry referred to as his Spanish cow, hey, that's not very nice. Henry believed that she would have no more children. He wanted to divorce her and take a younger queen. Church law did not allow divorce. However, the Pope could annul or set aside and ignore Henry's marriage, but only if proof could be found that the marriage had never been legal in the first place.
Could be true.
So in 1527, Henry asked the Pope to annul his marriage, but the Pope turned him down. The Pope did not want to offend Catherine's powerful nephew. No, not the monkey, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Henry took steps to solve his marriage problem himself. In 1529, he called Parliament into session and asked it to pass a set of laws that ended the Pope's power in England. This Parliament is known as the Reformation Parliament. In 1533, Henry secretly married Anne Boleyn, who was in her 20s, which Henry believed was young enough to give him a male heir. Shortly after, Parliament legalized Henry's divorce from Catherine. In 1534, Henry's break with the Pope was completed when Parliament voted to approve the Act of Supremacy. This called on people to take an oath recognizing the divorce and accepting Henry, not the Pope, as the official head of England's church. England was now a Protestant nation. The Act of Supremacy met with opposition. Thomas More, even though he had strongly criticized the church, remained a devout Catholic. His faith, he said, would not allow him to accept the terms of the act and refused to take the oath. In response, Henry had him arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London. In 1535, More was found guilty of high treason and executed, meaning his head was chopped off. Henry did not immediately get the male heir he sought. After Anne Boleyn gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, she fell out of Henry's favor. Eventually, she was charged with treason. Like Thomas More, she was imprisoned in the Tower of London. In 1536, she was found guilty and executed, meaning her head was chopped off. Oh, and the execution was performed by a French swordsman, not a guy with an axe. By the way, why was the ghost of Anne Boleyn always running? She wanted to get ahead. Almost at once, Henry took a third wife, Jane Seymour. In 1537, she gave him a son named Edward. Henry's happiness was tempered by his wife's death just 2 weeks later from complications due to childbirth. Henry married 3 more times. None of these marriages, however, produced children. Oh, for those of you keeping score on Henry VIII and his 6 wives, he divorced the first, executed the second, the third died. He divorced the fourth, executed the fifth, and he was still married to the 6th when he died. So that is, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Anyway, after Henry's death in 1547, each of his 3 children ruled England in turn. This created religious turmoil. Henry's son, Edward, became king when he was just 9 years old. Too young to rule alone, Edward VI was guided by adult advisors. These men were devout Protestants, and they introduced Protestant reforms to the English church. Almost constantly in ill health, Edward reigned for just 6 years. Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, took the throne in 1553. She was a Catholic who returned the English church to the rule of the Pope. Her efforts met with considerable resistance, and she had many Protestants executed, which is how she got the nickname Bloody Mary. When Mary died in 1558, Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter, inherited the throne. Elizabeth I was determined to return her kingdom to her father's Protestantism. In 1559, Parliament followed Elizabeth's wishes and set up the Church of England, or Anglican Church, with Elizabeth as its head. This was to be the only legal church in England.
What are we, dear?
Protestant, and fiercely proud of it.
Elizabeth decided to establish a state church that moderate Catholics and moderate Protestants might both accept. To please Protestants, priests in the Church of England were allowed to marry. They could also deliver sermons in English, not Latin. To please Catholics, the Church of England kept some of the ceremonies and services of the Catholic Church. In addition, church services were revised to be somewhat more acceptable to Catholics. By taking this moderate approach, Elizabeth brought a level of religious peace to England. Religion, however, remained a problem. Some Protestants pushed for Elizabeth to make more far-reaching church reforms. At the same time, some Catholics tried to overthrow Elizabeth and replace her with her cousin, the Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots. Queen Elizabeth also faced threats from Philip II, the Catholic King of Spain, who was her half-sister Bloody Mary's widower. Anyway, Elizabeth faced other difficulties. Money was one major problem. In the late 1500s, the English began to think about building an American empire as a new source of income. While colonies strengthened England economically, they did not enrich the Queen directly. Elizabeth's constant need for money would carry over to the next English monarch, and eventually lead to a bitter conflict between the monarch and Parliament. More on that later. In the meantime, the Reformation gained ground in other European countries.
Henry VIII, I am.